Okay, so now since we picked our quotes that we're going to use, let us just go back and look through the poem and make sure that we truly understand each line that we're going to be quoting and discussing. And make sure that they all aim to our thesis. Rhyming and word choice, sarcastic tone, maligns the critic more harshly than the writer. We might add he gives a recipe for being a great critic. We might add that in the thesis. So, okay. So, tis hard to say if greater want of skill appear in writing or judging ill, but of the two, less dangerous is the offense to tire our patience and mislead our sense. I think it'd be kind of cool to end with that. Sort of a little twist on what they expect. Maybe it's expected that, and maybe a lot of writers, that are writing an essay on this would use these first lines in the beginning. That's another thing I haven't mentioned. You you also want to, you want to try to mix it up partially because you just want to keep things fresh. So, and other students might be doing the same type of analysis, so you want to be a little bit fresh. So yeah, so that makes sense. And then 10 censure, 400 words miss. Yeah, 10 censure wrong for one miss. Closely we shall find. But he does concede this. In poets as true geniuses but rare. So it's rare for a poet or a writer to be a true genius. The same way that it's difficult for a critic to have amazing, impeccable taste. Like really, so we could mention that. But in fact, let's put that in there. I like that. I like that quote. All right. So these half-learned witlings. Now let's make sure that he's talking about all critics. Some have it first for wits. Nope, he's talking about people that maybe tried to be poets first and then they couldn't do it. Actually, no, they tried to be poets, did a good job, then they decided to be critics, and then they did a bad job. And then he says, some neither can for wits nor critics pass. So some can't write or critique well at all. And then he's talking about those half-learned witlings, so numerous. And then we're talking about facetious, sarcastic. We actually, I'd like to simplify. I'm all about simplifying. So let's just simplify. Well, let's dump the sarcastic tone. So let me just pull this. Okay, as evidenced by his rhyming and word choice. So rhyming, it's actually called rhyme. If you're gonna pick like a literary term, slant rhyme, etc. Metaphor, allusion, allegory. The use of allegory, the use of metaphor, the use of rhyme. So I could say through the use of rhyme and word choice, poet Alexander Pope maligns the critic much more harshly than the writer. Than he does the writer. It's a little clearer. We might be able to add, he gives a recipe for being a great critic. We could use although. Although poet, although poet Alexander Pope maligns the critic much more harshly than he does the writer in parts 1 and 2 of his essay on criticism, through the use of rhyme and word choice, comma. Nevertheless, he gives critic a recipe for being. He gives critics a recipe for being great. So we might want to add that dimension to the thesis. It's not required. I still think it could be really, really good without it. But let's just marinate on that for a little bit while we work over here. Okay, so let's just pull this over. All right, so then look closely, we shall find most of the season's judgment in the mind. Okay, so let's go and see if he's talking about all critics. I really want to see if he's talking about all critics, and that's easier to argue, right? It's easier to argue our thesis. So let's find. A perfect judge. All right. Skip that. We skip that. Because here, the reason I skipped that also, this stanza right here, is because he could be considered sarcastic. But he could just be, just being blunt and frank again. Maybe he is talking about, maybe he is speaking well and saying, look, you do have genius taste in learning. It's sort of hard to argue sarcasm. Again, that's going for a home run. I mean, if you can argue, I'm not saying tone is hard. I'm not saying it's super hard. It depends on the piece, right? It depends on myriad factors. But this, I don't want to. I want to weave in the tone, because then I think that would expand the essay to be longer. I'd have to throw tone into all of the quotes and the passages that we're referencing. So, I just feel like it'd be a little bit too long. I believe that it's I believe we'll be able to find, so I don't want to say easier, but I believe that we'll be able to find some amazing insights and have some amazing epiphanies as we go along with these quotes, and by trying to get rid of stuff that's more murky and even more challenging. If you want to really attack tone, I think tone should be, the only thing that you're talking about. Like, even though it seems like, he's being very sarcastic and da da da, and here, and then just talk about the double meanings. Say, hey, maybe he means genius taste, or maybe he's talking smack about the critic, and here's some other evidence after that, or before that, or in that stanza, So, but it definitely, it can easily unravel quickly, or be just hard to be held up. They want your argument to hold up to some scrutiny, and you don't want it to be so, challenging to be able to state your thesis and defend the argument. So yeah, in another essay, I'd write about tone, though. I'd write about sarcasm and whatnot, but not here. Here we're gonna, okay, so it's a good recipe to be a great critic. True wit. So we don't have that many quotes. And then the reason why, you guys might be wondering why I didn't pick the third one. Well, just for structure, I can just say parts 1 and 2. I don't have to say, oh, parts 1, 2, and 3. I don't have to trim. I don't have to pick 3 quotes in part 1, 3 in part 2, 3 in part 3. if I think that it's heavily weighted with these awesome quotes in parts 1 and 2, then I can just say parts 1 and 2. That can be my argument. Also, parts 3 has a lot of allusions, and I didn't want to open up that Pandora's box as an essay writer, because I probably would only write about part 3, or I would only write about those many allusions, with an A, allusions, to other material. I think there's so much in there. He talks about gods, and he talks about other authors. He talks about Dryden. He talks about probably Chaucer. He talks about La Mancha. So he's talking about Don Quixote by Cervantes. He talks about a lot, and it sort of defends great writing, right? And that would be a thesis that we could talk about, and that would be 8 pages, 6, 8 pages. I mean, that could be a lot of fun also. But this one is more, it's more just literally just strictly focusing on rhyme and word choice, and the fact that he's maligning the critic much more harshly. Now, one of the things that's going to be challenging here is it's hard to measure. This is hard to measure, saying he maligns the critic much more harshly. So we have to stack up evidence. And I think if we stack up the evidence that in 1 and 2, not the whole thing, but we're arguing that in 1 and 2, he maligns the critic much more harshly. Well, if we bookend the essay with the very first lines and the last lines, I think that is evidence that perhaps he maligns the critic much more harshly. So I might mention that in the conclusion. So we can mention conclusion, and you can say, put one of those, popular quotes in there, potentially. And then also, first line and last lines are negative critic, and more positive author. So that's hugely important. So we could mention that in the body, and then reemphasize that in different words in the conclusion, or we can not bring it up until the conclusion. We can wait and sort of keep our ace of spades in our pocket, and then drop it in our conclusion. I don't know, the latter, the second one is what I'm thinking about doing, where we just say, oh, in lines 1 through 3, they say this, he says this, and this is more negative to the critic than the author. And then at the end of the second at the end of the second part of part 2, Pope says this, which also bashes critics again. And then in the conclusion, we'll say, as aforementioned, as I iterated, or as I mentioned earlier, he bookends these parts with clear language that is more negative to the critic than the author. So I think that'd be a nice ace of spades. I think that'd be a nice way, because it's a good argument. I mean, that's definitely strong. And then there's all these other quotes, obviously, all throughout the text that we're going to be referencing. But where's that other line? Yeah, so sentences are wrong. There was a line in there, I think. It's since none can compass more than they intend. I think that might be given a little bit of kudos. It might give us negative. The teacher might disagree, but that's a little bit of a reach. So I'm gonna say. So this, I'm not gonna say double entendre, but it's it could be a double mean. It's kind of the same thing. Double meaning, double entendre. But a double entendre is usually like a word, just like one specific word. But this is more of like the phrase, none can compass. But yeah, so we can talk about that. I think that we might be given some kudos on that. And also, you want to have faith that sometimes you might not have these amazing insights. You might have one or two or a few, but just you have to have faith that like your explication, your correct explication of the poem is good. It's adding to a positive grade, a strong grade. You know, um, and when I was saying earlier, like sometimes going for the strong double right down the middle is solid. You can get an A with a double, you know, and I think that most educators would agree with this. If you're not that good at pulling off home runs or grand slams when it comes to writing or like writing essays, like go for the double. You could still get an A with a double. And what I mean by home runs is like, you know, really just trying to argue something that's obscure or trying to argue something that you're not comfortable arguing. Like if you're not good at arguing tone, like sarcasm, and being able to like unpack that well and you're just not comfortable with it, then it's gonna fall on its face, even though you've got good intentions. That reminds me of William Blake. You know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So even if though you have good intentions, um, it might not turn out well or better than if you just went for the double right up the middle. A teacher and these educators, by and large, not every single one. I'm not gonna talk about every single one, but by and large, I found in my travels and educational background is that most of them just want you to write a really good essay, really good. And they also know that like the student probably, you know, isn't as polished, like doesn't like might not even know what a home run is, or might not even know if they're being safe. You know, especially when you're younger. You know, you might pick that up a little later. But what I'm saying is that you want to go for something that you think is in your wheelhouse of being able to argue, you know, strongly and you know, persuasively. And for me, it's always been clear, extremely clear. I have to have an extremely clear understanding of exactly what that word means, or those you know the different potential meanings of those words, or of that line, or you know, etc. Um, or be able to talk about the character clearly and succinctly. Um, or otherwise, I won't put that in the essay. So that's like the start, right? You want to the a house is built on you have to have a strong foundation. So I'm all about a strong foundation, um, and then it's so much easier to build the house, right? So that's why I'm really sort of judicious with regards to just trimming and picking what I think are the 8 best quotes that I can argue and are the 10 best quotes, you know, and then just figure out how I'm going to structure it. I'm not going to do chronological. Well, let's just talk about it here. Are we going to do chronological? I don't know. Because I really want to put this in the end. I really want this to be like one of our aces of spades. And if you're really wondering, yeah, you know what we might do? We might put the last 2 in the end. Which is the last line of the second part, the last lines of the second part, the actual last 2 lines, and then the first lines of the first part. And then that can be, you know, part of our conclusion as well. So yeah, I definitely don't want it to be, you know, in order, every single one in order. However, with that being said, do we want to keep 10 cents you're wrong for one to miss? Seeds of Judgment. We might want to quote him. And this is something that, again, a lot of this is very subjective, depends on the teacher, etc. But in the intro paragraph, sometimes they say don't use a quote in the intro, never use a quote in the intro, or don't quote the actual piece in the intro. It, you know, again, it's some teachers might not mind. I think if you pull it off well, here's my theory, and it goes back to Quentin Tarantino, right? Like Pulp Fiction, or you know, a lot of his films, but Pulp Fiction for sure. It's like, just because something hasn't been done well before doesn't mean you shouldn't try to pull it off, because you might pull it off well. But only do it if you really think that you can pull it off extremely well, because it's risky, right? It's very, very risky. Obviously that wasn't his first screenplay, that wasn't his first character he created, it wasn't his first story. We probably watch hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of movies. I mean, the guy knew his stuff. It wasn't like he rolled out of bed one day and he's like, I'm gonna write this really bizarre, wacky movie that's out of order. Like, he really got confident and really, poured his heart and soul into being an auteur, like a writer director. So here, even though most students might not quote the actual piece in the first paragraph, we could potentially pull this off. Now, in my last, I wrote an essay before. Well, yeah, we can talk about that another time. But anyways, in an intro, you can use other quotes. But generally, you don't want to quote the actual piece. But I think that here it might work extremely well. And we'll see how it looks after we write the whole essay, and if we can think of a better idea on the way, then that's totally fine. But we'll see how it looks once we write the essay, and but a lot of times you want to keep that stuff in mind, or you just want to ask your teacher, is it okay? Or bring the rough draft. I used to bring my rough drafts almost every single time. For sure in college. And I don't think I did it in high school, but for sure in college, every single essay I wrote, I brought it to the instructor, the professor, beforehand, the rough draft. And I think it can be helpful, because they'll give you some pointers, and I think a lot of times they appreciate that you're doing work, and you're trying to do work early, so you can make sure that they can give one pass, one read through before the final draft is due. So, all right, I think this is a good start. I think that this will be in the conclusion. And he's going to basically be asking the critic. So we quoted Alexander Pope in the first paragraph, and let's also quote him in the conclusion. And see how it looks. Again, see how it looks. I don't know if I've ever done this before, where I quoted the actual piece in the first and the last. But it's sort of also reminding the teacher, the reader, that this is such a quotable essay, such a quotable poem. It's amazing. So, I don't know if it'll come off as too cute. Again, it's very subjective. It just depends. But this might be something that you want to ask as well. But yeah, I think we've got a good start for the structure, and I'll see you guys in the next video.